There's no place like the Cube.
Welcome to Joy in the Breakthrough, a podcast where we'll be talking to a wide range of leaders from different generations and backgrounds. Leaders who have found power in being broken open. I'm Connie Lindsey.
And I'm Anna Valencia. We are your hosts, and we believe that our challenges can lead to breakthroughs, and we want to share these insights with you.
We hope these stories will inspire you to find the I'm possible in you.
Hello, Joy in the Breakthrough audience. We're so excited to have our guest today, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford. She is a licensed psychologist, speaker, founder, and CEO of Therapy for Black Girls, and host of its wildly popular mental health podcast. She's also the author of Sisterhood Heals, The Transformative Power of Healing and Community, a must-need beach read and in paperback out now. Her work focuses on making mental health topics more relevant, accessible for Black women, and she specializes in creating spaces for them to have fuller and healthier relationships with themselves and others. I am so excited Dr. Joy is joining us. We are so honored to have such a superstar on the pod for our season 3. And just a little bit of background for all those listening and another lesson. I like to talk about this with Connie. We like to manifest our dreams. And I want to share how we use the courage to make one of those asked and manifest Dr. Joy to join us today. We have been admirers of Dr. Joy from far away, but little did we know that God was making a way to have her on our pod today. Let me tell you quickly how this God story happened and speaking good things into existence. Karen Spears, who is a dear friend of mine and former Chicago scholar and talented local Chicagoan, who helped design our first logo for Joy in the Breakthrough podcast, and also works with Dr. Joy, helped me meet her at the Thresholds Gala here this spring. Actually, Dr. Joy was sitting at my table. And so with Karen's encouragement and a few texts that I sent her, I built up my confidence and introduced myself and had my fangirl moment. And shortly after, we reached out and made the ask. And guess what? She said yes. And so we are here today and so honored to share space with you. So thank you so much, Dr. Joy, for sharing your time with us and with our listeners today.
Oh, it is such a pleasure to be here and great to see you, even though virtually this time. It's an honor to chat with you all this morning.
Well, I'll add my thanks and fangirling to Anna's and everyone else's, Dr. Joy, and how wonderful it is that you are Dr. Joy and we're on Joy in the Breakthrough, our podcast. I, too, have been a follower and a fan, and we were talking earlier about this whole notion of a sister. When we think about having a sister and a biological sister, but sisters that I believe that, God allows in our lives. And so thank you for opening all of us to that. And then bringing the real grounding of what that means and how we can do the mental health work. So I want us to jump in. Once again, we are over the moon joyful that you are with us today to have this conversation. And I just want to start with one question. Can you share with us, what influenced your life? How did Dr. Joy become Dr. Joy? Can you tell us a little bit about your becoming story?
Yeah, that feels like a very big question. It's like, where do I even start?
Right.
But I think I always start with family. Like, I feel like my family is what has grounded me and is really created an environment for me to flourish. And I don't feel like there was ever anybody who made me feel really bad about wanting to be very astute in terms of academics. I was always very, very competitive in academics. I joke because I have 2 little ones now who are into sports, and I was never a sports person. And so I feel like competition for me was how can I get the best grades? And they compete in a very different way, I feel now. But I feel like that was really encouraged in my family. I'm originally from Louisiana, and so I really feel like my love for psychology started on the front porch of my grandmother's home in Louisiana. Just people watching and paying attention to what was going on. And I had an opportunity to take a psychology class in high school and fell in love with the field. I didn't know there was a field that you could study that would satiate my like curiosity for human behavior. Like it just felt like, oh, I found my thing. And I initially thought that I wanted to be a professor of psychology, but then I had a chance to shadow a professor and was like, I actually don't think I want to teach anymore. But then I had a chance to observe a therapist and felt much more like, oh, this is my speed. Like this feels like something that I could do that would be really impactful. And so I really kind of took held to that dream in undergrad and have not looked back since.
Wow, wonderful. I love the stories about sitting on the porch. You know, we often hear people talk about motherhood or that wisdom, right? That our elders were practicing psychology with the things they would say. One of my favorite phrases that my mom, who was also from the South, would say to us when we complained about relationships not working, she would say, they call me doll baby. She would say, doll baby, even teeth and tongue fall out.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right? So I get the psychology of that. So thank you for sharing that, Anna.
Dr. Joy, you're going to find lots of Connie-isms. I like to write them down daily because she has a word for everything. And it's just like you just want to sit there and take notes, but you're like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be in this conversation too. So I have to catch myself. But we love her Connie-isms. You know, part of this podcast, when we manifested and started it, Connie and I, have navigated different waters, whether politics and government for me or corporate for her. And when we first started talking, we talked about these like breakthrough moments and this vulnerability of women leaders, especially diverse women leaders, and the need to talk more about it openly, about close to failures or failures where you might have felt like you were breaking open to then break through to joy. Do you have like one or two of those pivotal moments in your career, your life that you could share with our listeners and maybe some lessons learned from them?
Ooh. So I think the one that comes to mind easily, I feel like is an extension of this conversation of sisterhood that we've already kind of started. So, I started therapy for Black girls in 2014. It was just a blog. But then in 2017, I added both the podcast and the directory. Now, the podcast did not feel like such a stretch because my husband has background in radio production. And so I was like, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about like the technicalities of that because he can take care of that. And the directory I started as a Google Doc. So that felt like pretty easy for me to manage. But it did not take long before like the directory became this thing that like could not be managed with a Google Doc anymore. And we've already talked about, I'm a psychologist. And so I consider myself pretty techie in terms of like knowing how to use my iPhone and like, using the MacBook and like those kinds of things. But like WordPress development, which is the platform that the directory is built on, and like web stuff, like still really freaked me out and still does in a lot of ways. And so it felt really hard for me to like even figure out what questions I needed to ask a tech person to even figure out like, how do I continue to make this directory work and grow? And so the lesson for me was in getting out of my own way of feeling like I had to have the answers to everything. And so it wasn't until I opened up to a girlfriend, like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, I know that there needs to be a next step in the directory development, but I don't even know which questions to ask. I don't know who the right person is to ask. And I'm really struggling. Like, I was staying up into the middle of the night. I had found some freelancers on Upwork, I believe, but they were in India. And of course, there's a huge time difference. So I was staying up until like 2 or 3 in the morning to like get on calls with them. And, like it just felt very, very difficult. And I really feel like stretched me beyond my limits. And in that conversation with her, she shared like, oh, I have an incredible team in Seattle that I should connect you with. Like they manage my website and I know that they could do a great job for you. So I feel like there was a breakthrough there in like being not afraid to ask and like to be open with the things that we are struggling with, because you don't know like who has an answer, even if you wouldn't expect the answer to come from them.
That brings up for me the notion of vulnerability. Yes. Right? Because so often we want to be right. We don't want to ask the question that makes people think we don't know something. Help us, Dr. Joy. Two questions here. One is, how do we know, or what are the ways we can determine whom we can trust with that kind of vulnerability, right? Because we know everybody in the team ain't on our team. And then B, how would you help us to move through that? How do we determine ways that we can trust others? And then how do we do what you did, break through to guess what? I don't know how to do podcasting or whatever that thing might be. And then getting that help, which leads us beautifully to the book. But how do we go about getting that help?
Yeah, I think you bring up an incredible point, Connie, in that there does need to be some discernment, I think, in terms of who is trustworthy enough to allow them into this space, right? Like if I am a little concerned about somebody telling me no, or if I feel like I'm going to look like a failure, like who am I close to that I can actually trust with that won't throw that in my face or make me feel bad about it, but will instead open their arms and wrap their arms around me and say, hey, I'll walk with you through this. And I think that for many of us, there are those people in our circles, but they may not be the ones who come to mind first. Right. So I think that there are often people that we're close to, maybe that we spend a lot of time with, but that actually are not trustworthy or are not people who would not make us feel judged because we say we don't know something. And so I think it really is about making sure that you're kind of doing your due diligence in terms of figuring out who are the people in your circles that actually are trustworthy, who you can lean on in those moments when you feel most afraid.
Excellent.
I think the word you say, discernment, is so important because I think there's sometimes that inkling inside of you that we sometimes ignore. It's like we were built to kind of trust others and not trust ourselves all the time. And I think there's this like confidence we have to, especially in our young girls. I find my daughter even saying this at 4 years old to me, Mommy, are you mad at me? Why are you mad at me? Are you not proud of me? And I'm like, oh my gosh, where is this coming from at 4 years old that she's already kind of questioning and can mistakes? I love you. Or, if mommy sounds mad.
Yeah, I think back to our earlier conversation about like how family is incredibly grounding. I consider myself as a psychologist. My style to working with clients is very much based in like an interpersonal style, which means that I'm really paying attention to like what are my feelings about the client and like what kinds of things are coming up for me as I'm interacting with them. And I feel like my mother cultivated that in me way before I ever knew what that meant because she has always said, always trust your gut. Like that little drop in your stomach or, whatever that thing feels like for you. Sometimes it feels like butterflies. Sometimes it, presents differently, but it has never been wrong. And I think a lot of us have this story where with our mothers in particular, other women in our family, where we had a friend who like we ended up falling out with or like did not mean us well. And our moms or our aunties knew from the beginning, like, I got a little feeling about this person. Like, I don't know. Right. And we may not have been ready to accept it in the beginning, but eventually we did realize my mother has never been wrong about those people in my life. And so for me, it has really given me the confidence to like not question my gut. Right. Because even if you are wrong in terms of like the interpretation, like I think when you are connected to yourself and like your purpose, it will not lead you wrong. And so I think it's important when you feel that little butterfly or whatever that makes you like stop in your tracks as it relates to a person or a decision, it's important to kind of sit with that for some time to see what message that is trying to tell you. Because I think when we do that, we are very rarely wrong.
That's brilliant. And one of the tests that I do is I heard someone once say that the body will not believe the mind's lie. And that is the physiology, Dr. Joy, right, of my stomach, which is really our system saying, this is not comporting with my values and those sorts of things. And so that's one of the ways that I think I can tell myself I'm okay, but my body is going to tell me differently, right? The rapid heart rate or other things. I want to pivot just a little bit because this is so on my mind and heart, Dr. Joy, in terms of certainly the Black community and, the Black and brown community, the myths around mental health and getting psychological help and healing. I know in our family dynamic and in our community coming through, people didn't talk about it. There was the person in the community and people would say they are crazy or whatever. And this work that you're doing is so critically important. And it just warms my heart that you have a place for us to come and to talk about the really real. So if there are one or two things that you would want to do some myth busting around mental health, seeking that kind of help and becoming a part of this beautiful community and family that you've created for us, what would you share with our listeners?
Yeah, Connie, I want to offer a gentle challenge because I don't know that it is that like our people in our communities and families didn't talk about it. I just don't know
Mm-hmm.
that they had the correct language, right? So even
Mm-hmm.
again, going back to my family, like there were
Mm-hmm.
no conversations about mental health, so to
Right.
speak, right? Like there were those people like, that were in the community and you're like, oh, what's going on with them?
Mm-hmm.
But my mom and her sisters would have so many conversations about their nerves being bad, right?
Yes.
And so, of
Yes.
course, they were talking about mental health, but that didn't feel like a mental health conversation. And
Exactly.
now, what I know that is anxiety, right? And so, I
Yes.
do think that we have been talking about these things. We just maybe didn't have the correct language,
Mm-hmm.
or we didn't have like the guidance to be able to talk about these things like in the proper perspective. And so, I think one
Mm-hmm.
of the largest myths that I often hear around mental health is this idea that you only go to therapy like when the house is on fire, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak, right? Like that things have to be at a crisis level before you reach out to get support. And I think, of course, certainly go in those moments, but I think that there's also incredible work and incredible perspective and context that you can get from working with a therapist even before there is a crisis situation in terms of prevention, right? So if you are noticing that relationships don't ever seem to kind of go the way that you want, or you realize you kind of keep picking the same kind of either romantic partner, the same kind of friends, the same kind of work environment, and it doesn't ever end well for you, then that is a great opportunity to talk with a therapist to see, like, okay, what's going on here? Like, what's happening? Are there some patterns that I'm missing that could actually help me to make better decisions? So that's the first one. I think the second myth is that the first therapist that you work with is going to be the best fit for you. Because
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, it is a lot like dating, I think, in some ways that you may have to meet a couple of different therapists and work with a couple of different people before you find the person that is right for you. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you are a bad client or that the therapist is a bad therapist, but so much about the therapeutic relationship really depends on who you are when you come together in that
Mm-hmm.
dynamic. And so if it feels a little off, going back to the conversation about your gut feelings, then that may not be the person for you, but there may be somebody else who really will. And I think a lot of people get very discouraged because they talk with a therapist, especially if they've waited a long time
Yeah.
to like make that call. And it feels really hard, of course, to like go to this person. And if it doesn't go well, then a lot of people I think are easy to dismiss the entire process. But I
Mm-hmm.
would encourage people to kind of just stay engaged and, continue to do consultations and meet therapists until you find the person that's going to be a great fit for you.
So, Dr. Joy, we are excited and thrilled, and I'll have to figure out to meet you so that I can get my copy of the book signed. Sisterhood Heals. Please tell us about the book, anything you want our listeners to know.
Yeah, so Sisterhood Heals actually was supposed to be my first in-person activation for therapy for Black girls, and it was supposed to be happening in 2020. And we all know what 2020 then ended up looking like, and so we had to, of course, cancel. Like, it hadn't even become public yet, so the community didn't even know that we were planning this thing. But in conversations with my literary agent, so I had been kind of informally talking to an agent who had found me a couple of years ago and was like, I think that there's a book here, but I never knew like what the book was going to be. But after the event got canceled, she and I had a conversation and she said, well, what did you want that weekend to be? Like, what kinds of things were you planning to do or talk about? And that kind of became the outline for the book. And so Sisterhood Heals is both a celebration of the relationships that Black women have with one another and also a gentle invitation for us to do those better. Because I think that our relationships often have been lifelines for us and have been the things that have pulled us through some very, very difficult
Amen.
situations. And so I really wanted
Amen.
to like contribute. Like, I think women's relationships often feel trivial and like just like, oh, this little cute thing that happens. And I don't think that there has been enough attention paid to the life-saving measures of friendships between women. And so I really wanted to kind
Mhm.
of create and like contribute to the literature and like give this thing like some credence, right? Because it isn't trivial for a lot of us. It's really impactful and meaningful. And so the book is really talking about like all the things that are great about when we gather and how that is good for our mental health, and also giving people some language. Like I feel like a lot of what the book does is like give away this psychology that I have to people in very layman's terms, and to think about like how
Yes.
you are already like acting as a group, almost like a therapy group with your sister circles, and what kinds of things should you be on the lookout for in terms of these dynamics, and how can you lean into them more?
I love that because,
Awesome.
again, part of this podcast came to a fruition was just like a very hard part in my life, like a big failure moment. And part of that kind of resilience and recovery and finding joy again was from my sisters and from my friends that were able to put a mirror back in front of my face and say, no, this is who you are. This is not who the world tells you who you think you are. This is who you are. And this is what we know you to be. And these are the values we love about you. So I think I love the celebration of sisterhood. And Connie knows this too after reading Michelle Obama's second book. And she talks about her kitchen table and building that kitchen table and how important it is to be intentional about celebrating each other, about, making that space. And now that I'm a new mom and, a working mom, there's very little time for my own self-care, but finding time to tend to my friendships really helps restore and renew me and give me that life that you need. And I hope that as women, we can talk about that more because this whole competitiveness, this whole, you know, got to climb over each other, get to the top, or the being the only one at the table and kind of celebrating that. And I know I saw Connie make a face. So I know she's got something to say about that. That has to stop. Like that serves no one and does not serve your mental health or anything that you're trying to accomplish. I think there's enough for all of us. I'll let Connie jump in because she's got real world experience on that in the corporate chain.
Actually, we want to thank you, Anna. I want to hear from Dr. Joy about some of this as well, because those places that comparison. It said comparison is the thief of joy, and I think it's because of the season I'm in my life right now. I've earned every fine line, and wrinkle. If I have wrinkles and lines, because I smile a lot, because I do find joy in things. But you're right, that comparison to other people. And when you're talking to your clients, Dr. Joy, and talk to us about being who you are, covering all the ground you stand on, in that sisterhood, how can we help support each other in acknowledging that you're unique? You are who you are. Help us figure out a way or give us some advice on that.
Yeah. So, I think, Anna, you bring up such a great point. This idea of like competition and like we have to climb over each other. And I think the key here is really to pay attention to these systems that actually exist that lead to us believing these things, right? So there's a whole chapter in the book called Sisters Over Systems, because
Yes.
there are a lot of people who benefit when we want to like take each other down, right? Like that is how white supremacy and patriarchy and all of these isms and archies continue, because we buy into these, right? And so I want people not to feel ashamed because they have some of those feelings, because it is a systemic thing, right? Like the system is made for you to feel that way, that only one of us can succeed. So if I get to the C-suite, then I got to close the door behind me because I got to protect my spot. But what would happen if we said, you know what, I'm here and I'm throwing the door wide open behind me and I'm bringing as many people as I can behind me so that we can then change the system, right? And the system then looks very different. And so everybody else maybe who's younger than us or 2 generations removed from us does not then grow up believing that. And so I think that is why sisterhood is so important, both in our personal circles. So like you mentioned, Anna, like our friends really carry us through these transitions in our lives, and like they have often seen multiple versions of us and can really hold up that mirror, but also like just the sisterhood of us being women generally, right? And so what kinds of things has Connie learned from being in the corporate spaces that she could share with us that makes the road a little easier for us? And I think when you think about like the role that you play in a system, I think to your question, Connie, like there is a unique perspective and a unique gift and skill that we each bring to the table. And so it's not about like comparing your gift to mine. It is about how our gifts come together to like impact the entire system and to really help to, make all of us stronger. Like the circle gets stronger when we all bring our unique perspectives and gifts to the table. And so I think that that's important to think about, that your gift and skill is not any lesser than anyone else's. It just is very different, but we need all of them.
I love that. And the whole notion that I often talk about, to be courageous in that, the bringing people with us, you have to build that muscle to be able to say, yes, I might be the only one, but to me, that just makes you a bigger target, right? So the whole idea of lifting as I climb and to build that kind of courage. And in my sisterhood circles, my sister circles, that's where I've gotten the courage, or they help strengthen me to say, yep, I'm going back again. And when I'm in meetings where there are people who don't look like me, that's the water that I'm going to carry. And I'm not going to be afraid or ashamed to ask the question, why aren't there more Black and brown women in this particular role? And that is what I have done. And knowing that there is risk to that, but it's a risk that I'm willing to take. And knowing that people have loved me and supported me for my authenticity more than anything because I was willing to do that. It just made people they're comfortable around me. They want to work in that kind of an environment where they are acknowledged and seen, which I think is so important. So I had a question that was just kind of rumbling around in my brain last night as I was thinking about our conversation. Define sisterhood for us.
Ooh, that feels both so easy, but also like really hard to put into words. But I think sisterhood really, so I think, people would normally think like your biological sisters, right? But I think that it is expansive in that it is the people we choose to call our family, right? Like these are the people who you are intentional, like to your point, Anna, about making sure that they are a part of your circle and you're a part of theirs. Like they are the people that you choose to walk through life with. And so they may not be biological. I think in a lot of cases they are not, but you are very intentional about creating a different kind of family system with these people.
I love that. My daughter now goes, she calls all her special friends now sisters. She's a only child right now. And I think it's so cute because she's like, I want to get this journal for my sister Walker. I want to get this for my sister Ava, or I'm going to see my sister Karis. And it really warms my heart that she's kind of making these friends and call them her sisters. And I love that about doing life together. And I have no real, like a biological family here in Chicago near, but it's been great to see my chosen sisters really help me with parenting, offering a quick pickup or whatever. It just means so much. Or just to say, how are you today? No, really, how is your heart? Like you can tell me the truth that you're not okay, and I can hold that space for you and carry that along with you. I think that life is made to live together in that way. And so I'm so happy you're celebrating. I know Connie was talking before he's joined us this morning about different type of friends in your group. And I'd love for you to expand on that because we were trying to figure out in our little group of me, Connie, and we're like, I don't think we have any wallflowers, but we could be wrong.
Right. I had seen the interview and it was so fascinating to me and I loved it. The 4 types: firecracker, leader, wallflower, and peacemaker. Dr. Joy, tell us about that and the little test that we can do as we.
Yes, I love this. So this is, I feel like, because I really want people like to read the book and interact with the book. Like the book, I don't want to be like, oh, this is just a cute book on my shelf. Like I really want it to be a tool that people use for conversations. And so what do we love more than a quiz? So there is an actual quiz that you can take to figure out who you are in your sister circle and like the roles that other people play. And so if you go to sisterhoodheals.com/quiz, you can take that quiz. And so to your point, Anna and Connie, so there are often 4 types we find in our friend group. So there is the peacemaker, which is what you would think, right? Like if 2 people have kind of had some tension in the group, this is the person who's going to call you all together and say, hey, let's come to my house and like, let's hash this out. That is the peacemaker. The firecracker is the person, Connie, this to your point earlier of like the person who says the thing in the meeting that everybody else is thinking, but nobody wants to say is often the firecracker, right? And so sometimes, that is often really good, but sometimes there may be like some concerns with tact or like, okay, did that really need to be said in this moment? But the firecracker will say those things regardless, right? The leader is the person who is often most responsible for like, if there is a group trip happening, they are the ones who have like found the location. Okay, everybody send me the money. Like, here's our registration, like all of those things. Like they are the person who's most instrumental in kind of keeping the group moving. And then the wallflower is the person who often is kind of like in the background, but like when they do speak, everybody stops to listen because it is often very like profound. And it's like they are spending a lot of time observing kind of the dynamics of the group as opposed to kind of needing to be in the middle.
I love that. So sisterhoodheals.com. we all have our book, but we'd certainly want to go online so we can take that quiz. I can see that as being a phenomenal sisterhood, sister group meeting. It'll be wonderful to do that for sure.
And I think also to do is like a book club.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Well, as we're winding down, I want
For
to
sure.
jump to some more fun questions. What are you listening to, either music or on your pod, whether it's an audiobook or any podcast, other things out there that we should know about?
Ooh, so I still have not stopped listening to Renaissance from Beyonce.
Yes.
So I'm still very much, I mean, I have listened to Cowboy Carter and I also enjoy it, but I'm still trying to hold on to that Renaissance energy. So that really has not left my playlist. I'm also, in terms of reading, so my kids, I'm trying to encourage them to do more reading by reading with them. And so with my 10-year-old now, we are reading this book called Worthy. That talks a lot about kind of some of the things that we've talked about in terms of, kind of like being bullied and like how do you appreciate yourself and like the different kinds of perspectives that you might bring to a group. So that is my latest read.
Who's Worthy by?
But I
Dr.
also,
Joy, who's Worthy by?
I think the author's last name is Paciao, so I think it's like Paciao. So I may not be pronouncing that correctly.
I'm going to look for this for Riri, Mariana.
Yeah, well, it may be a little older than like a 4-year-old,
older,
but
yes.
I think it has also been made into like a film on Netflix, and so we're gonna read it and then watch the film on Netflix. I also just watched Inside Out 2. Which was incredible. Like my husband and I like were tearful in the movie and the kids were just like bopping along and we're like, see, this is the magic of like Disney and Pixar because they make things that like kids can enjoy, but that the adults also get a lot of information and messages through. So I think people should also add that to their watch list, reading list.
We watched Inside Out 2 as well. And so my daughter was having a very frustrating moment. She was like, crying, upset, and we're trying to talk through it. And she's like, Mommy, sadness and joy are just arguing in my brain. And I can't really hear. I can't really think. I can't think right now. And I'm like, oh my gosh. It's like, or she'll say, angry is in my brain right now. And, and I love that she could name her emotions like that from this movie. And so it is incredible how like our books and what they're exposed to and talking about those things now and how to kind of walk through our emotions. I wish I could have everyone in my office and even adults in my life like watch the movie, like my husband, but
we could do a watch party. We could do a watch
right,
party.
that's a great like team building kind of exercise, I think.
That would be a fun one.
Exactly.
And then we'll get to Connie for our say less, but another word that we like to also define here is joy. So can you define joy for us, Dr. Joy?
Oh, it feels like that, again, is something hard to put a definition to, but I think you know it when you feel it, right? Like the deep belly laughs. For me, joy often feels like sunshine on my face. Like I really, like that is, I think, when I feel most joyful, like when I'm just walk outside and like not when it's too hot, but just outside when it's a nice day and a breeze, like sunshine on my face just feels like joy. And I think joy also feels like those like soulful connections that we have with other people.
I love that. Well, I've so enjoyed our time together. You exude joy. I know it's in your name, but you can feel the sunshine even through virtually of your heart and your kindness. And so thank you for taking the time to uplift our podcast and give your wisdom to our listeners as we're starting out in this journey.
And making space for us, Dr. Joy. You embody your name. Sisterhood heals. I am already envisioning the book club conversations we're going to have. And we wish you continued joy and tremendous success and prosperity as you help us heal in so many ways. The power of what you're doing is seismographic. And so we wish you continued joy and just continue to help us heal.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It has been so beautiful to spend some time with you both. I appreciate you.
As always, in our favorite part of the segment, Connie always has more to say to us by saying less. Connie, what do you have for us today?
So today, Anna, you know how I love to look at Greek and all the other different words. So I do have a Greek word for us today. And that word today is irenic. And it means peaceful and conciliatory. After our conversation with Dr. Joy, it just moved in my spirit that this notion of peace, and we've talked about being at peace and not in pieces. And the word irenic comes from the Greek word irenikos, meaning belonging to peace. And so today, I wish our listeners peace, the kind of healing that comes from knowing who you are, that you are exactly where you are supposed to be, and that you get to choose those individuals with whom you want to invest your time and those who can support you. So in my work of becoming that ironic person, I wish you all peace and always joy. The Joy in the Breakthrough podcast is hosted by Anna Valencia and me, Connie Lindsey.
And podcasting is a team sport. So thank you to our dream team, our producer, Anna DeShawn, our editor, Laura Jimenez, our video editor, Joelle Ortiz.
To learn more about today's guests or the show, visit our show notes on our website, joyitbpod.com, and on Instagram at joyitbpod.
Joy in the Breakthrough is a production of The Cube, spelled with a Q. The Cube is your #1 curated platform to discover the best BIPOC podcasts. Support this show and more like it by joining the Cube app and follow the Cube across social media at the Cube app.
Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again on the next episode.